In 1985, honeymooners David and Lisa Park vanished without a trace during what should have been the most romantic week of their lives, disappearing from a popular lakeside resort in the middle of their vacation with no explanation, no witnesses, and no clues about what had happened to the young couple who had seemed so deeply in love and excited about their future together. But 21 years later, something shocking would be discovered that would finally reveal the truth about their mysterious disappearance and change everything their families had believed about that terrible summer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The story begins in the summer of 1985, when 24-year-old David Park and his new bride, 22-year-old Lisa, arrived at Pine Lake Resort in northern Michigan for their honeymoon. They had been married just 3 days earlier in a small ceremony in Lisa's hometown of Grand Rapids, surrounded by family and friends who had watched the couple's relationship blossom over the previous 2 years. David worked as an accountant at a local firm, while Lisa had just completed her nursing degree and was about to start her first job at a hospital in their shared apartment complex, where they had met. Pine Lake Resort was a sprawling property that had been welcoming vacationers since the 1920s, featuring rustic cabins, a main lodge with dining facilities, and miles of scenic shoreline along one of Michigan's most pristine lakes. The resort sat on the eastern shore of Pine Lake, a deep, clear body of water that stretched nearly 8 miles long and 3 miles wide at its broadest point. Towering pine trees surrounded the lake, creating a natural amphitheater that made the water appear almost black in certain light, while the western shore rose into gentle hills that provided spectacular sunset views for romantic couples seeking the perfect backdrop for their getaway. David had chosen Pine Lake Resort specifically because Lisa had mentioned loving the area during a family camping trip when she was a teenager. He had spent months researching the perfect honeymoon destination, wanting something that felt both romantic and adventurous without being too far from home. The resort offered exactly what he was looking for, with opportunities for hiking, boating, fishing, and simply enjoying each other's company in a setting that felt worlds away from their busy lives in Grand Rapids. The couple checked into Cabin 7, a cozy log structure about 50 yards from the main lodge, with a perfect view of the lake through large windows that faced west toward the sunset. Resort manager Eleanor Hoffman remembered them clearly because of how obviously happy they were, constantly holding hands and laughing together as they explored the property and planned their activities for the week. David had arranged for flowers to be waiting in their cabin, and Lisa had been so delighted that she had actually cried tears of joy, according to Eleanor, who had been working at the resort for nearly 15 years and had seen countless honeymooning couples come and go. For the first 3 days of their stay, David and Lisa fell into a comfortable routine that seemed to embody everything a perfect honeymoon should be. They would wake up late, have breakfast on their cabin's small porch while watching the morning mist rise off the lake, then spend their days hiking the various trails that wound through the surrounding forest, or renting a small motorboat to explore the lake's numerous coves and inlets. In the evenings, they would dress up for dinner at the main lodge, where they quickly became favorites of the staff because of their obvious affection for each other and their enthusiasm for everything the resort offered. Other guests at the resort, during that time period, remembered the young couple as being almost ideally matched, with David's quiet, thoughtful personality complementing Lisa's more outgoing and spontaneous nature. They seemed to bring out the best in each other, with David becoming more animated and playful around Lisa, while she appeared to find a sense of calm and focus in his steady presence. Several other couples mentioned later that David and Lisa had become something of an inspiration, representing the kind of relationship that everyone hoped to find. The resort's activities director, 26-year-old Mark Stevens, spent considerable time with the couple during their first few days, helping them plan hiking routes and offering recommendations for the best fishing spots and scenic overlooks. Mark had been working at Pine Lake Resort for 3 summers and prided himself on his ability to help guests make the most of their time at the lake. He found David and Lisa to be particularly engaged visitors, asking thoughtful questions about the area's history and wildlife, and showing genuine interest in the stories he shared about the lake and surrounding region. According to Mark's later recollections, David had been especially interested in the scenic drive that wound around the lake's perimeter, a narrow 2-lane road that offered spectacular views but required careful attention because of its numerous curves and elevation changes. The road had been built in the 1950s as part of a tourism development project, following the natural contours of the shoreline and providing access to several smaller resorts and private properties that dotted the lake's circumference. While beautiful during daylight hours, the road could be challenging to navigate at night because of limited lighting and the way shadows from the dense forest canopy could obscure the road's curves and boundaries. On their 4th day at the resort, July 15, 1985, David and Lisa seemed particularly excited about their plans for the evening. They had spent the morning hiking to a waterfall about 2 miles from the resort, then returned to their cabin for a late lunch and an afternoon nap. When they emerged around 4 o'clock that afternoon, they were dressed nicely and told several people they encountered that they were planning to drive around the lake to watch the sunset from a different vantage point, something they had been talking about doing since their arrival. Eleanor Hoffman saw them getting into David's car, a bright red convertible that his parents had given him as a graduation gift when he finished college. She remembered thinking how perfect they looked together, with Lisa wearing a yellow sundress that David had complimented several times during their stay, and David in khakis and a polo shirt that Lisa had bought him specifically for the honeymoon. They had seemed excited but not rushed, taking time to check their camera and a small cooler they had packed with snacks and drinks for their sunset drive. The last confirmed sighting of David and Lisa came from Tommy Martinez, a 16-year-old, who worked part-time at the resort's boat dock and was heading home around 6:30 that evening when he saw their car traveling slowly along the lakeside road, heading south toward the more remote section of the lake's perimeter. Tommy later remembered waving at the car and seeing someone wave back, though he couldn't be certain whether it was David or Lisa. The timing seemed right for a sunset viewing expedition, as sunset that evening was scheduled for approximately 8:15, giving the couple plenty of time to find a good location and enjoy the experience they had been planning. When David and Lisa failed to return to their cabin that evening, Eleanor Hoffman initially wasn't concerned. Honeymooning couples often lost track of time, and it wasn't unusual for guests to extend their evening activities, especially when they were enjoying a romantic sunset drive. The resort had a policy of not checking on guests unless they missed checkout or specifically requested assistance, so Eleanor simply made a note to check on Cabin 7 the following morning if the couple didn't appear for breakfast. By 10 o'clock, the next morning, when David and Lisa still hadn't been seen and their car wasn't in its usual parking spot near their cabin, Eleanor began to feel the first stirrings of genuine concern. She knocked on the door of Cabin 7 and received no response, then used her master key to check inside. The cabin showed clear signs that the couple had planned to return that evening, with clothes laid out for the next day, toiletries arranged on the bathroom counter, and a bottle of wine sitting on the small dining table with a note from David, expressing his love for Lisa and his excitement about their future together. Eleanor immediately contacted the local sheriff's department, speaking with Deputy Charles Morrison, who had been with the department for 8 years and had handled several missing person cases in the area. Deputy Morrison arrived at the resort within an hour and began a systematic investigation that would continue for months, but ultimately yield frustratingly few concrete leads or answers about what had happened to the young couple. The initial search focused on the most likely scenarios for what might have happened during David and Lisa's sunset drive. Deputy Morrison organized a team of volunteers from the resort staff and local community to walk the entire perimeter road, looking for any signs of an accident, mechanical breakdown, or other incident that might explain the couple's disappearance. The road stretched approximately 25 miles around the lake, with numerous side roads, scenic overlooks, and potential areas where a car might have gone off the roadway. Search teams spent 3 full days methodically covering every mile of the lakeside road and its various offshoots, paying particular attention to areas where the road curved sharply or where the elevation dropped significantly toward the water. They found no skid marks, no broken guardrails, no debris, and no indication that any vehicle had recently left the roadway. The thoroughness of this initial search would later become a source of both comfort and frustration for the families, as it seemed to rule out the most obvious explanation for the couple's disappearance, while providing no alternative theories. Local authorities also contacted hospitals and police departments throughout the region, checking whether David and Lisa might have been involved in an accident or incident away from the immediate Pine Lake area. Deputy Morrison expanded the search to include a 50-mile radius around the resort, reasoning that the couple might have decided to extend their drive beyond the lake's perimeter, or might have become lost and ended up in an unfamiliar area where they encountered problems. The investigation revealed that David and Lisa had withdrawn $200 from their bank account on the morning of their disappearance, using an ATM at a gas station about 10 miles from the resort. The timing of this transaction, around 11:30 that morning, fit with their known activities and suggested they had been planning to pay for gas, food, or other expenses related to their extended stay at the resort. The withdrawal provided investigators with their last concrete evidence of the couple's activities and confirmed that they had been traveling in their convertible at least until that point. David's parents, Robert and Margaret Park, drove up from Grand Rapids as soon as they learned about their son's disappearance. Robert was a successful insurance agent who had built a comfortable life for his family, while Margaret worked as an elementary school teacher and was known in their community for her volunteer work with local children's charities. They had been thrilled about David's marriage to Lisa, welcoming her into their family with genuine warmth and excitement about the grandchildren they hoped would follow. Lisa's family consisted of her mother, Janet Collins, who had raised Lisa as a single parent after her husband died in a work accident when Lisa was just 12 years old. Janet worked 2 jobs to support herself and Lisa, cleaning office buildings at night and working at a local department store during the day. She had sacrificed enormously to help Lisa get through nursing school, and Lisa's graduation and marriage to David had represented the fulfillment of all her hopes and dreams for her daughter's future. The 2 families found themselves thrown together by tragedy, united in their desperate need for answers about what had happened to David and Lisa. They stayed at the resort for more than a week, participating in search efforts and providing investigators with detailed information about the couple's habits, relationships, and any possible reasons why they might have encountered trouble or decided to leave the area unexpectedly. Both families were adamant that David and Lisa would never have voluntarily disappeared or abandoned their responsibilities without explanation. David was described as incredibly reliable and responsible, someone who had never missed work or failed to keep a commitment in his adult life. Lisa was portrayed as equally dependable, with a strong sense of duty to her mother and excitement about starting her nursing career that made it inconceivable she would simply walk away from everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The investigation expanded to include interviews with all resort staff and guests who had been present during David and Lisa's stay, seeking any information about the couple's activities, conversations, or interactions that might provide clues about their disappearance. These interviews painted a consistent picture of a happy, well-adjusted couple who had shown no signs of distress, conflict, or unusual behavior during their time at the resort. Mark Stevens, the activities director, provided investigators with detailed information about his conversations with David regarding the scenic drive around the lake. Mark explained that he had recommended several specific overlooks and viewing areas, including a particularly beautiful spot on the lake's western shore where many couples went to watch sunsets. This location, known locally as Sunset Point, became a focus of intensive search efforts because it seemed like the most likely destination for David and Lisa's evening drive. Sunset Point was located approximately 12 miles from Pine Lake Resort, accessible via the winding lakeside road that David had been so interested in exploring. The area featured a small parking area and a short trail that led to an elevated viewing platform overlooking the lake. Search teams found evidence that multiple vehicles had used the parking area recently, but nothing that could be definitively connected to David and Lisa's convertible. Deputy Morrison also organized search efforts on the lake itself, using boats provided by the resort and local volunteers to cover areas near the shoreline where a car might have gone into the water. However, Pine Lake was known for its exceptional depth, reaching more than 200 feet in some areas, and the clarity of the water meant that anything on the lake bottom would be visible only in relatively shallow areas near the shore. The underwater search efforts were hampered by both the lake's depth and the limited resources available to the small county sheriff's department. Deputy Morrison arranged for a volunteer dive team to examine areas where the road came closest to the water, but their equipment and experience were better suited to recreational diving than serious search and recovery operations. The divers covered what they considered the most likely locations, but found no evidence of a submerged vehicle or any other clues related to the missing couple. As days turned into weeks, the investigation began to consider alternative theories about what might have happened to David and Lisa. Deputy Morrison explored the possibility that they had been victims of a crime, perhaps encountering someone with malicious intent during their sunset drive. However, the resort area had virtually no history of violent crime, and there were no reports of suspicious individuals or activities in the area during the time period in question. The possibility that David and Lisa had staged their own disappearance was also considered, but quickly dismissed by investigators, who found no evidence of planning, no financial irregularities, and no indication that either person had been experiencing problems that might motivate them to abandon their lives. Both families provided complete access to bank records, personal documents, and other information that confirmed the couple's stable financial situation and their genuine excitement about their future together. Local media coverage of the disappearance brought additional volunteers and resources to the search effort, but also introduced complications as amateur investigators and curiosity seekers began showing up at Pine Lake Resort and the surrounding area. Eleanor Hoffman found herself dealing with reporters, photographers, and well-meaning but intrusive visitors who wanted to help with the search but often interfered with official investigation efforts. The story captured public attention, partly because David and Lisa seemed to represent such an ideal young couple, the kind of people who should have been beginning a long and happy life together rather than vanishing without explanation. Their wedding photos, which were widely circulated by media outlets, showed two people who appeared genuinely in love and excited about their future, making their disappearance seem even more tragic and mysterious. After 6 weeks of intensive Searching and investigation. Deputy Morrison was forced to acknowledge that his department had exhausted its leads and resources. The case remained officially open, but active search efforts were scaled back significantly. The families were encouraged to continue hoping for new information or developments, but investigators were honest about the likelihood that the case might never be solved without some kind of breakthrough or unexpected discovery. Robert and Margaret. Park hired a private investigator, a former state police detective named William Hayes, who specialized in missing person cases. Hayes spent 3 months reviewing all available evidence and conducting his own interviews and search efforts, but ultimately reached the same frustrating conclusion as the official investigation. David and Lisa Park had simply vanished without leaving any trace that could be followed or explained. Janet Collins, working with limited financial resources, organized volunteer search efforts that continued sporadically for more than a year after her daughter's disappearance. She coordinated with local churches and community groups to conduct periodic searches of areas that hadn't been thoroughly covered by official efforts, driven by a mother's refusal to accept that her daughter was truly gone without any explanation. The case generated occasional renewed interest over the following years, particularly when other missing person cases in the region received media attention. Investigators would review the David and Lisa Park file whenever similar disappearances occurred, looking for potential connections or patterns that might provide new leads. However, the Pine Lake area remained remarkably free of serious crimes or unexplained incidents, making the couple's disappearance seem even more unusual and inexplicable. Eleanor Hoffman kept Cabin 7 available for several months after the disappearance, hoping that David and Lisa might return with some explanation for their absence. When it became clear that this wouldn't happen, she had the cabin cleaned and returned to regular rental rotation. But she never forgot the young couple who had seemed so happy during their brief stay at the resort. As the first anniversary of the disappearance approached, both families organized memorial services that served as both tributes to David and Lisa and appeals for anyone with information to come forward. The services were well attended by community members who had been touched by the story, but they generated no new leads or information about what had happened to the missing couple. The Park and Collins families struggled with the absence of closure that came from not knowing what had happened to their children. Without bodies to bury or definitive evidence of death, they found themselves in a painful limbo, unable to properly grieve or move forward while maintaining hope that David and Lisa might somehow still be alive. This uncertainty created ongoing, emotional challenges that affected both families for years to come. Deputy Morrison, who had invested enormous time and energy in the investigation, found the unsolved case to be one of the most frustrating experiences of his law enforcement career. He continued to review the file periodically and remained available to pursue any new leads that might emerge, but privately acknowledged that the case had gone cold in a way that seemed unlikely to change without some dramatic new development. Pine Lake Resort gradually returned to normal operations, though Eleanor Hoffman found that she never stopped thinking about David and Lisa whenever new honeymooning couples checked into the property. The resort implemented some new safety protocols, including better communication with guests about local road conditions and recommendations for evening activities, though these changes couldn't address the fundamental mystery of what had happened to the missing couple. The lakeside road where David and Lisa had last been seen became a focus of ongoing attention from both investigators and curiosity seekers. Local authorities installed additional warning signs and reflectors to improve nighttime visibility, though there was no evidence that poor road conditions had contributed to the couple's disappearance. These improvements were made more as a precautionary measure than as a response to any specific safety concerns identified during the investigation. Mark Stevens, the resort activities director, left his job at Pine Lake Resort the following summer, partly because he couldn't shake his feelings of responsibility for having recommended the scenic drive that had been David and Lisa's last known destination. He moved to a different state and took a job that didn't involve providing recommendations or guidance to vacationing couples, though he never forgot the young honeymooners who had disappeared after following his suggestions. As years passed, the case file for David and Lisa Park grew thicker with periodic reviews, follow-up investigations, and reports from people who claimed to have seen the missing couple in various locations around the country. None of these sightings proved credible upon investigation, but each one required time and resources to check out thoroughly. The case became a reminder of how completely people could vanish in an era before cell phones, GPS tracking, and the comprehensive digital trails that would make such disappearances much more difficult in later decades. The families maintained their own informal network of contacts and continued to share information whenever they received tips or leads about possible sightings of David and Lisa. Robert Park, in particular, became something of an expert on missing person cases, reading extensively about investigative techniques and staying in touch with families dealing with similar situations. His insurance background had given him analytical skills that he applied to reviewing evidence and exploring theories about what might have happened to his son and daughter-in-law. Margaret Park found solace in maintaining David's childhood bedroom exactly as he had left it, creating a shrine-like space that served as a focus for her ongoing hope that he might someday return. She also became involved with support groups for families of missing persons, finding some comfort in connecting with others who understood the unique challenges of living with unresolved loss and uncertainty. Janet Collins channeled her grief into advocacy work, pushing for improvements in missing person investigation procedures and resources for families dealing with unexplained disappearances. Her efforts contributed to several policy changes at the state level, including requirements for more comprehensive record-keeping and faster response times when people were reported missing under suspicious circumstances. The Pine Lake community itself was deeply affected by the unsolved disappearance, with many residents developing heightened awareness of personal safety and increased concern about the vulnerability of tourists who might not be familiar with local conditions. The case became part of local folklore, discussed in hushed tones and serving as a cautionary tale about how quickly normal activities could turn tragic for reasons that might never be understood. Local businesses, particularly those serving tourists, found themselves fielding occasional questions about the David and Lisa Park case, especially during summer months when new visitors arrived and learned about the area's most famous unsolved mystery. These conversations served to keep the case alive in public consciousness, though they rarely generated useful new information or leads for investigators to pursue. The lack of resolution also affected the broader law enforcement community in the region, serving as a reminder of the limitations that small departments faced when dealing with complex investigations. Deputy Morrison's experience with the case influenced his approach to later missing person reports, leading him to request additional resources and expertise more quickly when similar situations arose. As the case entered its second decade without resolution, periodic efforts were made to apply new investigative techniques and technologies to the evidence that had been collected. However, the physical evidence was limited, and most of the new approaches being developed were better suited to cases involving DNA analysis, digital communications, or other types of clues that simply weren't available in the David and Lisa Park investigation. The resort area continued to develop and change over the years, with new properties being built and existing facilities being modernized and expanded. These changes gradually altered some of the physical locations that had been important to the original investigation, though core elements like the Lakeside Road and Sunset Point remained essentially unchanged. The lake itself became more popular with recreational boaters and water sports enthusiasts, leading to increased traffic and activity that might have interfered with any evidence that had been overlooked during the original search efforts. Weather patterns and seasonal variations also continued to affect the lake and surrounding area, with periodic droughts and unusually wet seasons causing water levels to fluctuate significantly from year to year. During particularly dry periods, local residents would sometimes speculate about whether low water levels might reveal new evidence related to the missing couple. But these hopes never materialized into actual discoveries during the first 2 decades after the disappearance. The emotional toll on the families remained significant throughout this period, with holidays and anniversaries serving as painful reminders of David and Lisa's absence. Wedding anniversaries were particularly difficult, as they represented not only the celebration of the couple's brief marriage, but also the beginning of the vacation that had ended so mysteriously. The families developed their own traditions for marking these occasions, including private memorial services and charitable donations in David and Lisa's memory. Professional counseling and therapy helped family members develop coping strategies for dealing with the ongoing uncertainty and grief, but the fundamental questions about what had happened to David and Lisa remained as painful and unanswered as ever. The absence of closure created ongoing challenges that affected relationships, career decisions, and life choices for everyone who had been close to the missing couple. By the early 2000s, the case had settled into a pattern of periodic reviews and occasional media attention, particularly around significant anniversaries or when similar cases received public attention. The investigation file remained open, but active efforts had been suspended years earlier due to lack of new leads or evidence. The families had accepted that they might never learn what had happened to David and Lisa, though they never stopped hoping for some kind of resolution. Pine Lake Resort had changed ownership twice during the intervening years, but each new management team was briefed on the unsolved disappearance and maintained policies designed to prevent similar incidents. The case had become part of the property's history, mentioned in staff training and remembered by long-term employees who had been present during the original investigation. The local sheriff's department had also seen significant personnel changes, with Deputy Morrison retiring and being replaced by younger officers who knew the David and Lisa Park case primarily through file reviews rather than personal involvement. However, the department maintained its commitment to pursuing any new leads or evidence that might emerge, and the case remained one of the most well-documented, unsolved investigations in the department's history. Technology advances in areas like satellite imagery, GPS mapping, and underwater search equipment had created new possibilities for revisiting cold cases. But budget constraints and the age of the David and Lisa Park investigation made it difficult to justify significant new expenditures without compelling reasons to believe that such efforts would be successful. The case remained a candidate for renewed investigation if circumstances warranted, but it was not considered a high priority for resource allocation. The 20th anniversary of the disappearance in 2005 generated renewed media attention and prompted fresh appeals for information from the public. Several television programs featured the case, bringing it to the attention of national audiences who might not have been familiar with the story. These programs generated numerous tips and potential leads, but investigation of these reports failed to produce any credible new information about what had happened to the missing couple. Family members used the anniversary coverage as an opportunity to establish a scholarship fund in David and Lisa's memory, providing financial assistance to nursing students and accounting majors who demonstrated both academic achievement and commitment to community service. The scholarship program served as a positive legacy for the missing couple, while keeping their story alive in public consciousness. The Pine Lake area itself had continued to evolve during the 20 years since David and Lisa's disappearance, with improved road maintenance, better lighting along the scenic route, and enhanced safety measures at popular viewing areas like Sunset Point. These improvements reflected both general infrastructure development and specific concerns that had been raised in the aftermath of the couple's disappearance, though there remained no evidence that safety issues had contributed to whatever had happened to them. Local residents who had been involved in the original search efforts often reflected on the case when they encountered new visitors to the area, particularly young couples who reminded them of David and Lisa. The story had become a permanent part of the community's collective memory, serving as both a reminder of the area's most famous mystery and a testament to the community's willingness to support families facing tragedy. Tourist activity at Pine Lake had actually increased significantly during the years following the disappearance, partly due to the media attention the case had generated. While this growth brought economic benefits to the region, it also created challenges for law enforcement and resort operators who found themselves dealing with curiosity seekers and amateur investigators who were drawn to the area by the unsolved mystery rather than its natural attractions. The physical evidence from the original investigation had been carefully preserved in the Sheriff's Department's evidence storage facility, maintained in the hope that future technological advances might enable new types of analysis or testing. However, much of the evidence consisted of photographs, witness statements, and documentation rather than physical items that could be subjected to advanced scientific examination. Weather records from the time of the disappearance had been thoroughly analyzed during the original investigation, confirming that conditions on the evening of July 15, 1985, had been clear and calm with good visibility. This information ruled out several potential explanations for what might have happened to David and Lisa, but it also eliminated environmental factors that might have provided clues about their fate. The convertible that David and Lisa had been driving was a relatively common vehicle model, making it difficult for investigators to distinguish potential sightings of their specific car from the numerous similar vehicles that would have been on the roads during the time period following their disappearance. Vehicle identification databases were less comprehensive in 1985 than they would become in later years, limiting investigators' ability to track the car's movements or determine whether it had been involved in accidents or other incidents in distant locations. Financial records for both David and Lisa had been thoroughly examined during the initial investigation, revealing no unusual transactions, debts, or other monetary issues that might have motivated them to disappear voluntarily or made them targets for criminals. Their financial situation appeared stable and consistent with their known lifestyle and circumstances, providing no clues about what might have happened to them. The couple's personal relationships had also been extensively investigated, with interviews conducted with friends, co-workers, and acquaintances who might have had information about problems or conflicts that could be relevant to their disappearance. These interviews consistently portrayed David and Lisa as having strong, healthy relationships with the people in their lives, with no indication of serious disputes or issues that might have put them at risk. Employment records showed that both David and Lisa had been performing well in their respective jobs and had no indication of work-related stress or conflicts that might have influenced their situation. David's supervisor at the accounting firm described him as reliable and competent, while Lisa's nursing school instructors remembered her as dedicated and enthusiastic about beginning her healthcare career. The investigation had also explored whether David and Lisa might have been victims of a random crime, such as a robbery or assault that had escalated beyond the perpetrator's original intentions. However, the complete absence of evidence supporting this theory, combined with the low crime rate in the Pine Lake area, made it seem unlikely that such an incident had occurred without leaving some trace that investigators could follow. As the case approached its 21st anniversary in 2006, family members and investigators acknowledged that they were no closer to understanding what had happened to David and Lisa than they had been in the weeks immediately following their disappearance. The passage of time had not revealed new evidence or provided fresh perspectives that might crack the case, leaving everyone involved with the same frustrating questions that had dominated the investigation from the beginning. The summer of 2006 brought an unprecedented drought to the Great Lakes region, with precipitation levels falling far below normal for 3 consecutive months. Rivers, streams, and lakes throughout the area dropped to levels that hadn't been seen in decades, exposing shorelines, boat docks, and underwater features that had been submerged for years. Pine Lake was particularly affected by the drought conditions, with water levels dropping more than 15 feet below their normal summer levels. Local residents and business owners watched with growing concern as the lake receded week after week, exposing rocky areas and sandy beaches that had been underwater within memory of even the oldest residents. Boat launches became unusable as the water retreated beyond their designed access points, and many docks extended far beyond the new shoreline, suspended in air above what had recently been navigable water. The dramatic change in the lake's appearance drew curious visitors who wanted to see the exposed areas and explore features that were normally hidden beneath the surface. Children and adults alike wandered across the newly revealed lake bottom, collecting interesting rocks, examining underwater formations, and marveling at how different the familiar lake looked when so much of its hidden geography was exposed to view. It was during one of these informal explorations, on a hot afternoon in late August 2006, that a local resident named Sarah Mitchell made a discovery that would finally provide answers to the 21-year-old mystery of what had happened to David and Lisa Park. Sarah was walking along the newly exposed shoreline with her teenage daughter Emma, collecting unusual stones and shells, when Emma noticed something artificial protruding from the sandy lake bottom in an area that was normally submerged under more than 20 feet of water. What Emma had discovered was the roof of a red convertible car, perfectly preserved in the cold, oxygen-poor environment at the bottom of Pine Lake. The car was positioned almost directly below a section of the scenic lakeside road where a curve and a slight rise in the roadway had hidden a gap in the guardrail that had apparently existed for years without being noticed or repaired by maintenance crews. Sarah Mitchell immediately contacted the sheriff's department, and within hours the scene was secured and investigation teams were mobilized to examine what appeared to be the answer to Pine Lake's most enduring mystery. The car's license plate, still clearly visible despite its long submersion, matched the registration for David Park's vehicle, confirming that this was indeed the car that had vanished with the young couple more than 2 decades earlier. Recovery. Operations began the following morning, with specialized equipment brought in to carefully extract the vehicle from its position on the lake bottom, while preserving any evidence that might remain inside. The drought conditions that had revealed the car also made the recovery operation significantly easier than it would have been under normal water levels, allowing investigators to work with unprecedented access to what had been the scene of the accident Inside the car, investigators found the remains of David and Lisa Park, still wearing the clothes they had been wearing on the evening of their disappearance. Personal effects, including Lisa's yellow sundress and David's camera, were remarkably well preserved due to the lake's cold temperatures and low oxygen levels. The camera even contained film that could be developed, revealing the last photos that David and Lisa had taken together during their final afternoon at the resort. The investigation into the recovered vehicle revealed that David and Lisa had been driving along the scenic lakeside road when they had missed a curve that was partially obscured by overhanging tree branches and inadequate reflective markers. The car had gone through a gap in the guardrail that had been created by a previous accident years earlier, but had never been properly repaired, despite being reported to county maintenance authorities on multiple occasions. The car had plunged down a steep embankment directly into the deepest part of Pine Lake, coming to rest in an area that had not been searched during the original investigation because it was considered too far from the road to be a likely accident site. The car's dark color and the lake's exceptional depth had made it invisible to searchers, even those using boats and limited diving equipment. Forensic examination confirmed that David and Lisa had died on impact from the crash, providing some comfort to their families with the knowledge that their suffering had been brief. The couple had apparently been returning to the resort after watching the sunset from one of the scenic overlooks when the accident occurred, probably sometime between 8:30 and 9 o'clock on the evening of July 15th, 1985. The discovery brought immediate closure to the families who had spent more than 2 decades wondering what had happened to David and Lisa. Robert and Margaret Park, now in their 70s, traveled to Pine Lake to see where their son's car had been found and to finally lay him to rest with the dignity and ceremony that had been impossible during the years of uncertainty about his fate. Janet Collins, who had never remarried and had devoted much of her life to searching for her daughter, found herself overwhelmed by a mixture of grief and relief at finally having answers to the questions that had haunted her for so long. The recovery of Lisa's remains allowed her to hold the funeral service she had been unable to arrange for more than 20 years, providing the closure that had been so long denied. The revelation of what had actually happened to David and Lisa also prompted a comprehensive review of road safety conditions around Pine Lake, leading to significant improvements in guardrails, warning signs, and reflective markers along the scenic route. The gap in the guardrail that had contributed to the fatal accident was properly repaired, and additional safety measures were implemented to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Eleanor Hoffman, who had retired from managing Pine Lake Resort, but still lived in the area, attended the memorial service that the families held for David and Lisa at the site where their car had been recovered. She brought flowers and a letter she had written to the couple during the years when their fate was unknown, expressing her sorrow for what had happened and her admiration for the love they had shared during their brief time at the resort. The case closure brought recognition to Sarah and Emma Mitchell for their role in finally solving Pine Lake's most famous mystery. Their afternoon walk along the drought-exposed shoreline had accomplished what 21 years of investigation and searching had been unable to achieve, demonstrating how chance discoveries could sometimes provide answers that systematic efforts had missed. Deputy Morrison, now retired but still living in the area, found himself reflecting on the irony that the answer to the case that had so frustrated him during his career had been hidden in plain sight, waiting only for the right environmental conditions to reveal itself. The drought that had caused so many problems for the region had also provided the key to solving a mystery that had affected so many lives for so many years. The recovery of David and Lisa Park brought national media attention back to Pine Lake, but this time the coverage focused on closure and resolution rather than mystery and speculation. The story of the drought revelation captured public imagination as an example of how natural events could sometimes provide answers that human efforts had been unable to discover. The scholarship fund that had been established in David and Lisa's memory received a significant increase in donations following the discovery of their remains, allowing it to provide assistance to a larger number of students pursuing careers in nursing and accounting. The fund became a lasting tribute to the young couple whose love story had been cut short by a tragic accident, but whose memory continued to help others achieve their educational and professional goals. Pine Lake Resort, now under its third ownership, since David and Lisa's disappearance, held a ceremony to honor the couple's memory and to acknowledge the impact their story had had on the resort and the surrounding community. The ceremony included the planting of 2 trees near the shore of the lake, creating a living memorial that would grow and flourish as a symbol of the love that David and Lisa had shared. The resolution of the case also provided important lessons for law enforcement agencies about the challenges of underwater search operations and the limitations of the equipment and techniques that had been available in 1985. Modern search technology and procedures might have located the submerged car much more quickly, but such resources had not been accessible to the small county sheriff's department that had handled the original investigation. Environmental scientists noted that the drought conditions that had revealed David and Lisa's car were part of a larger pattern of climate variability that could potentially expose other long-hidden evidence of past accidents or incidents. The Pine Lake discovery prompted renewed interest in using low water periods as opportunities to search for other missing vehicles or evidence that might be hidden in lakes and rivers throughout the region. The families found that having definitive answers about what had happened to David and Lisa allowed them to process their grief in ways that had been impossible during the years of uncertainty. The knowledge that the couple had died together quickly and without suffering provided comfort that helped ease some of the pain that had been compounded by not knowing their fate. The story of David and Lisa Park became a reminder of how quickly life could change and how important it was to cherish the time spent with loved ones. Their brief but intense love story, preserved in photographs and memories from their honeymoon, continued to inspire others to appreciate the relationships and experiences that made life meaningful. The successful resolution of the case also demonstrated the importance of never giving up hope, even when investigations seemed to have exhausted all possible leads. The family's persistence in keeping David and Lisa's story alive had ensured that when the opportunity for discovery finally arrived, there were still people who cared enough to recognize its significance and take appropriate action. As Pine Lake returned to normal water levels in subsequent years, the site where David and Lisa's car had been found was marked with a small memorial plaque that served as a reminder of the young couple who had died there and the community that had never stopped caring about their fate. The plaque became a place of quiet reflection for visitors who learned about the story and wanted to pay their respects to the memory of 2 people whose love had been preserved even in tragedy. The resolution of the David and Lisa Park case brought enclosure not only to their families, but to an entire community that had been affected by their mysterious disappearance. The 21 years of uncertainty had created bonds among the people who had searched, hoped, and remembered, and the final discovery of the truth provided a sense of completion that allowed everyone to move forward while still honoring the memory of the young couple whose story had touched so many lives. The drought that revealed their final resting place had lasted only a few months, but its impact would be felt for generations through the peace it brought to grieving families and the safety improvements it prompted for future travelers along Pine Lake's scenic shores. David and Lisa Park's love story, which had begun with such promise and hope, had finally found its ending, not in the mystery that had surrounded them for so long, but in the simple truth of an accident that had kept them together even in death.